I know Thanksgiving's already passed, and I don't know. I probably should have done this one a few days ago, but I guess it won't hurt. I'm gonna talk about the first Thanksgiving because it's controversial. Everybody's talking about the first Thanksgiving and how it was so awful, and it was the colonizers and the mean, nasty old white people. When it really wasn't, and I'm going to explain that and tell you about the origin of the first Thanksgiving. Of course, we all know that it was the Pilgrims who settled in Massachusetts, and they came over on the Mayflower, and, blah, blah, blah. And you really can't understand much about those people unless you look at where they came from and who they were. So I'm going to lead up a little bit to the first Thanksgiving and maybe tell you a little bit, give you a little bit of historical overview. Now, of course, Protestantism was instituted in England under Henry VIII. He couldn't have a son with his wife, Catherine, and so he got rid of her, but he couldn't get divorced because the Pope wouldn't let him, so he just started his own church. And so England effectively became Protestant under that. And then there was a lot of conflict and, what have you. And then ultimately, there was this sect of Protestants. They were Calvinists. And if you don't know who Calvinists were, you might want to just kind of look that one up. They were, yeah. But anyway, they were called Puritans because they wanted to purify England of Catholics. They wanted to get rid of all traces of Catholicism. And they had it broke out into a war with the king. And I guess they call it the English Civil War, led by the Parliament, which was led by this guy here, Oliver Cromwell. That's his picture. He looks like a pretty tough fella. They called him Old Ironsides. Pardon me. They called him Old Ironsides. And anyway, they defeated the royalists. They defeated the king, and, they cut his head off, and they killed him. There's a picture of it there. They lopped his old head right off, and they held it up, and I don't know if I don't know if the head was still alive when they held it up to see the crowd. A lot of people who got their heads cut off remained conscious. And so they'd be hanging there, their old heads hanging there, and their eyes would be open, and they'd look out on the crowd, but their body would, be gone. There's another picture of it there, holding his head up, and everybody watching, and look at little kids, looking at it. That's just the way they did things back then. Executions were public. Okay, so now the Puritans have conquered England, and they set up nominally what would be called a republic. Actually, Oliver Cromwell was called the Lord Protector, which is just a fancy word for dictator. And, they set up, their government, their republic. But one of the first things, nobody liked it. One of the very first things they did when they came to power was outlaw Christmas of all things. Their beliefs, they believed that, if you worked hard, you'd go to heaven. They also believed that if you made good money and got rich, that was a sign that God liked you more than everybody else. If you've ever wondered why in America people regard wealth as being somehow indicative of one's worth as a human being, well, there you have it. That's where it comes from, more or less. But anyway, they did a lot of other stuff too. Anything pointlessly enjoyable, they frowned on it. Now, like right here, he shut down inns, all the theaters. Imagine, the Globe Theater. This wasn't too far past the time of Shakespeare. He shut it all down. If you got caught playing football, as it says here, you got caught playing football on Sunday, you could be whipped. Cussing was punishable by a fine. And if you kept cussing, they'd send you to prison. Good grief, I would have been a jailbird for sure. I'm trying to keep from cussing on the video, but it might prove pointless. But anyway, what else did they do? You couldn't work, any unnecessarily work on Sunday. You could get put in the stocks. They'd put you in the stocks. They would put your hands in your head through this board contraption to where they were just kind of locked and you couldn't move. And then people would come around and throw stuff at you, poop and rotten fruit and eggs, and they would get their slop jars, their chamber pots, and throw them at you with all the piss on you, and you'd have to sit there for like a certain amount of time, and that was your punishment for working unnecessarily on Sunday. They didn't have any kind of a feast day. One day a month you had to fast and not eat anything. But no, you couldn't have a feast day. You couldn't have, like I already said, no Christmas. I mean, it was all enforced by soldiers, by the military. Well, as you can imagine, the people of England they got tired of that shit. And after 10 years, when Cromwell died, thank God, they got rid of him and they brought the king back. They one of Charles's descendants, I think, or maybe it was William of Orange from Holland. I'm not really sure. But the point is, they brought the king back, and none too soon. Well, as you can well imagine, after that, nobody liked these people anymore, if they ever did in the first place. So a bunch of them took off, and they took off for Holland. They went to the Netherlands, and they settled, it says here, for the most part, in a town called Leiden. There's a house there. Nobody lived there really, but they met there, And let's keep on going. Let me show you this Puritan nightclub they used to get wild at, because they did get wild sometimes. Yeah, right there, the Puritan nightclub, a church there in Leiden. Well, they didn't like it too much in Leiden. These were the people who became the Pilgrims. They didn't like it in Leiden at all. Why, may you ask? Because there was religious freedom. They didn't want religious freedom at all. They didn't want any of that. They didn't want any of that. So they finally got tired of that. They like, oh yeah, look at those people. They're having a good time. They're hanging out at the club and drinking and whoring around and partying and oh, and my God, there's Christmas here. So anyway, they decided the only thing they could do was pack up and head for the New World. So off they go to the wonderful world of Massachusetts. So anyway, they get to Massachusetts, the New World, and they land on Plymouth Rock. And it's the first rock they got off on. Here's a picture of them getting all ready, praying, having a good time. This is getting wild, Puritan style. There's a guy there. He's so excited he's having a heart attack while he's beating his drum over there. But anyway, here they came over on the Mayflower. There they are on the Mayflower. Look at that. He's got some underwear, looks like, on his head. And, oh yeah, that's another thing. These people, Europeans back in those days, they weren't too clean. And, toilet paper wasn't something it wasn't a concept I don't think they were really too familiar with. So maybe that's his underwear. He's carrying a fresh pair of underwear on his head to change out when he needs to. But anyway, here they go, and then, pardon me, I had to memorize the names of all these people when I was a kid. The only one I remember is Miles Standish. Oh, and John Smith, he's one too. They're the Indians, the white people. Oh, they were so superior. They're giving the Indians their bounty. This is also about this time the story of Pocahontas got started. And anyway, and of course, naturally, they set up a strict religious theocracy where any dissent was forbidden. Essentially, they were a religious cult that escaped to the New World. It's not unlike, the Jonestown settlement with Jim Jones, where they had the mass suicide. And, it's the same concept, going to Guyana. Of course, these people didn't all kill themselves. They just killed the Indians instead. They believed that nature was bad. Anything that was natural is bad. Of course, so naturally, they perceived the Indians as being the literal children of Satan himself. And they were obsessed with Satan, devils. These were the people who gave us the Salem witch trials. I don't know. As an aside, my ancestor settled just about the same time within maybe 100 miles of this place. However, my ancestor, his name was Johannes, he had the good sense to settle in the Dutch colony of Pennsylvania, from Germany, where he came from, just right about this time. So while they're sitting there having their little hoedown there, I had my umpteenth great-granddaddy probably standing not 75 miles from there. At any rate, though, Malcolm X, he made a statement once. He said, "My ancestors didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on them." And I think he was right on point about that. I don't have much good to say about these people. And yet their story has dominated our history. It's funny how things like that go. So now to the topic at hand, that being the first Thanksgiving, which occurred in 1863 at the height of the war between the states. In 1863, the United States was losing big time. They had lost battle after battle. And to top it all off, the English were about to enter the war on the side of the CSA. They were sending in soldiers into Canada, and they were getting ready to invade the United States from the north. Things looked pretty dark. So to prevent the English from invading the United States, Lincoln freed the slaves, which undercut English popular opinion of the war, of the Confederacy, and from that point on, England, there wasn't any thought of England entering the war. The English wouldn't tolerate it. The people wouldn't tolerate it because they were against slavery, and slavery hadn't been an issue up to that point. And then throughout there, you had the Battle of Chancellorsville, you had some of the first drafts. But the real biggie was on July the 4th, 1863. You had two things happen, Gettysburg and Vicksburg. We all know about Gettysburg, but Vicksburg was more important, and I'll show you why. Vicksburg was on the Mississippi, and it was the last city along the Mississippi that the Confederacy still held. Most of the Confederacy's agricultural products, food and what have you, was coming from over here in Texas, and they were bringing it west or east into the rest of the CSA. Well, when they cut the Mississippi off and they cut the Confederacy in two, it really pretty much meant the end. These people over here in the east were going to starve. And from that point on, it was all downhill for the Confederate States of America. Here's a picture of some of the action at Vicksburg. I've been there. They ran these gunboats up and down the Mississippi and blasted the shit out of the city. And then they tried to invade it from the east. Let's see if I can find some pictures of that. I guess I don't have any. You can't imagine how the massive earthworks around the city. They didn't celebrate the 4th of July in Vicksburg for over 100 years. I think they do now, but at any rate. So anyway, after Vicksburg, it was pretty much a done deal. The war drifted on for a year or so, but there wasn't ever any doubt after that. So, on October 3rd, 1863, Lincoln declared Thanksgiving to be, the third Thursday of November. This is what Lincoln said, I do therefore invite my fellow citizens in every part of the United States to set apart and observe the last Thursday of November, as the day of Thanksgiving. So every year, the last Thursday of November, we have Thanksgiving. And obviously, it has nothing to do with the religious cult that settled in Massachusetts. Nothing at all. So when you start hearing people talking about colonizers and what a bad bunch of people they were and blah, 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 it's all true of the Pilgrims, but that has nothing to do with the holiday of Thanksgiving. So there. I hope you enjoyed my video. I hope I was entertaining. Peace out.